On a gray February morning in 1958, Hollywood's elite gathered on a studio lot not to celebrate a new film, but to make sure an era had truly ended. Harry Cohn, the despotic co-founder and president of Columbia Pictures, lay in his coffin as thousands of onlookers crowded his memorial. Comedian Red Skelton took in the unusually large turnout of mourners and cracked a joke that has gone down in history. It proves what Harry always said: give the public what they want and they'll come out for it. It was a final punchline befitting Cohn's legacy, a tyrant so feared and loathed that even his funeral became Hollywood's hottest ticket, just to confirm the tyrant was really dead. So how did a poor kid from New York slums rise to such heights and infamy in Tinseltown? The story of Harry Cohn is a tale of brass-knuckle ambition, legendary films, ruined relationships, and casting couch scandals that rival any Hollywood horror story. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Harry Cohn was born on July 23, 1891 on Manhattan's Lower East Side, the son of Joseph Cohn, an immigrant Polish-Jewish tailor, and his wife Bella. The Cohns' cramped tenement life offered little luxury. Young Harry, restless and street-smart, quit school at 14 to hustle a living. Over the next decade, he sampled the hard-scrabble breadth of New York's working-class life. He hawked haberdashery as a fur salesman, punched tickets as a streetcar conductor, and even did a stint as a pool hustler. He had the gift of gab and a love of music, which led him to plug popular songs on Tin Pan Alley, belting out tunes in vaudeville halls to coax audiences into buying sheet music. Brash, ambitious, and perpetually dissatisfied, Cohn learned early how to command attention. Those rough-edged experiences hardened his hide and sharpened his tongue, and both would become hallmarks of his hustler persona in Hollywood. By 1913, Cohn muscled his way into the nascent film business, taking a job as a low-level secretary for a movie distributor in New York. His older brother, Jack Cohn, had already found work in the industry, so sensing bigger opportunities out west, Harry followed Jack to Hollywood in the late 1910s and briefly became an assistant to Universal Pictures founder Carl Laemmle. It didn't take long for Harry to chafe at playing second fiddle. Unwilling to be subordinate to any boss, he decided to strike out on his own. In 1919, Harry Cohn, his brother Jack, and a lawyer friend, Joe Brandt, pooled their modest resources to found a tiny film company. They called it the CBC Film Sales Company, ostensibly for Cohn Brandt Cohn, though Hollywood wags snickered that CBC really stood for corned beef and cabbage, which was a mocking reference to its low rent status. Operating out of a ramshackle Poverty Row studio, CBC churned out 2 reel comedies and low-budget westerns on shoestring budgets. Hollywood's established studios dismissed the upstart. In fact, industry elites scoffed at the early workings of the company. Yet Harry relished the role of scrappy underdog. He later bragged, "I built Columbia with spit and wire and these fists. I stole, cheated, and beat people's brains out. Columbia is not just my love. It's my baby, my life." This wasn't empty bluster. Cohn's swagger and willingness to play rough wood in time elevate CBC from obscurity to the Hollywood big leagues. In the early 1920s, success came haltingly. CBC's films were cheap and unpolished and profits were scant, but Harry was as crafty as he was crude. Figuring that the company's clunky name fed its corned beef and cabbage image, he took the decision to rebrand. In 1924, after Joe Brandt decided to sell his share of the venture, the Cohn brothers bought him out and promptly renamed the studio Columbia Pictures Corporation. The grand new name, of course invoking a female personification of America, was an audacious bit of showmanship for a company still operating out of Poverty Row. Yet Cohn understood the value of surface image. Behind the scenes, rumor had it he secured the funds for expansion with help from some unsavory contacts. Hollywood whispers linked Harry to New York and Chicago mob bosses, whose friendship and cash purportedly helped him finance the buyout of Brandt's interest. It was a connection Cohn neither confirmed nor denied, but Harry certainly kept close acquaintances with multiple mob bosses when he needed money. Such street alliances would resurface dramatically later in Cohn's career. For now, they gave Columbia the cash injection it needed to start competing with the big studios. New name in hand, Columbia struggled through the mid-1920s, making mostly B-movies. Harry, serving as head of production on the West Coast while brother Jack managed New York distribution, was desperate for a hit. Salvation arrived in the form of an eager young director named Frank Capra. Late in 1927, Capra, then an unknown, walked through Columbia's gates looking for work, and it would lead to Harry taking a chance. As Hollywood lore has it, Cohn ran down an alphabetical list of unemployed directors at the studio and stopped at the first name, Capra. Little matter that he was totally unproven. It was a fateful pairing. Capra's first Columbia picture, 1928's That Certain Thing, was made on a shoestring but turned a tidy profit. Impressed, Cohn signed Capra to a longer deal. The jovial Italian-American director and the hard-nosed studio boss could not have been more different, yet together they put Columbia on the map. Over the next few years, Capra's films, witty, optimistic comedies like Platinum Blonde and Lady for a Day, won critical praise and box office success. But it Happened One Night from 1934 that proved the jackpot. Cohn reluctantly allowed Capra to borrow two big stars, Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert, from other studios for the project. This was an almost unheard-of favor at the time, and it was granted only because MGM's Louis B. Mayer was punishing Gable by loaning him out. The romantic comedy about a runaway heiress and a rogue reporter became a surprise smash. In 1935, It Happened One Night swept the Academy Awards, winning Best Picture, Best Director, and Acting awards for both Gable and Colbert. The film's triumph was unprecedented, the first time a Poverty Row studio had captured Hollywood's top honors. This was a rare but real case where one picture made a studio. Columbia Pictures, long derided as a B-movie factory, suddenly had prestige. As Capra later said, "We stumbled through it, and this goes to show you how much luck and timing means in show business." Luck or not, Harry reveled in the reflected glory. The Oscar haul put Columbia in the big leagues, and Cohn never let anyone forget who was boss. Flush with success, Harry consolidated his power. In the mid-1930s, he wrested control of Columbia's hierarchy away from his older brother Jack, with whom he often quarreled. Harry installed himself as both president of the studio and head of production, a dual role no other studio chief had ever held. Indeed, from that point on, Harry Cohn was Columbia Pictures in every conceivable way. He answered only to himself, and those under him answered only to Harry Cohn. Full of confidence, he moved the studio to larger quarters on Gower Street in Hollywood, emblazoning the Columbia name high and wide. By the end of the 1930s, Columbia was consistently turning out hits, from screwball comedies like The Awful Truth to crowd pleasers like Lost Horizon, and competing with far better funded rivals. It had taken a decade of scraping and hustling, but Harry Cohn's outfit had transformed from corned beef and cabbage into an Academy Award-winning major studio. Yet even as Columbia rose, Cohn's relationships were deteriorating. The volatile traits that made him a formidable striver, his ferocious temper, egotism, and appetite for control, were about to ignite conflicts that threatened his empire from within. Hollywood was already wondering, would Harry Cohn's ego destroy the very dream he had built? The answer is that it would destroy far more than that. I'd like to take a moment to remind you all that I have launched an exciting new series over on Patreon and in the YouTube members area, audio versions of Hollywood Histories. Every week I'll be uploading an audio-only mini episode for you to enjoy once you are subscribed to the Hollywood Histories tier. And our members here on YouTube will get exactly the same content by clicking the join button below the video. I'll be covering a wide variety of Hollywood-related stories, from silent movie scandals to the lives of lesser-known actors, to disastrous productions and much more. Higher tiers get early access to videos and other perks, even including being able to request a full Hollywood Mysteries episode on your favorite star. So if you'd like to help Hollywood Mysteries thrive, please take a look at what's on offer over on Patreon and in the members area. I'll put a link on screen now, so you can check out the perks and decide for yourself. Patreon also has a 1-month free trial so you can see if you like the extra content before you commit. And I'd like to say welcome to all the new supporters both here on YouTube and on Patreon. And of course, a huge thanks to those who have been pitching in for a while now. Thanks again. And now let's get back to the growing monster that was Harry Cohn's ego. Harry's ascent to power had not mellowed him. It had done the complete opposite. With Columbia now a bona fide studio, Cohn ruled it like a personal fiefdom. He was already earning nicknames whispered in the industry like White Fang, and more amusingly, King Cohn. To those who worked for him, the monikers were apt. Cohn was a stocky bull of a man with hooded eyes and a perpetual scowl who was prone to profanity-laced tirades. He arranged his executive office as a throne room of intimidation. After a visit to fascist Italy in 1933, Cohn took inspiration from Benito Mussolini's office decor, which was an intriguing step for a man of Jewish origin. He had a massive desk built atop a raised platform, deliberately higher than any other chairs in the room, so visitors had to look up at him. Behind Cohn's chair glistened a display case of Oscars, including those just won by Capra's films. He was reinforcing his power with golden proof. From this perch, Cohn would berate, bully, and browbeat anyone who displeased him. He even had antechambers where supplicants were made to wait, sometimes for hours, until the boss buzzed them in at his whim. He had a hair-trigger temper, recalled one Columbia employee, and a vocabulary of crude insults to match. The genteel social manners he could display at Hollywood parties vanished the moment one crossed his office threshold. A dual nature that Moe Howard of the Three Stooges once likened to a real Jekyll and Hyde personality. At work, Harry Cohn was all Hyde. Nowhere was Cohn's domineering style more evident than in dealing with creative talents. Frank Capra, who had delivered Columbia's greatest early successes, found himself in an escalating power struggle with Cohn as the 1930s went on. Cohn disliked how Capra's growing fame threatened to eclipse the studio itself. In 1937, after Capra won his second Best Director Oscar for You Can't Take It With You, Columbia placed a full-page ad touting an upcoming B film as if it were directed by Frank Capra, even though Capra had nothing to do with the low-budget clunker. It was a pretty ploy by Cohn to remind Capra who held the reins. Capra was furious and complained bitterly to Cohn. The studio chief's response was essentially, "Know your place." Cohn bluntly reminded Capra that he was the boss. When Capra attempted to break his contract in protest, Cohn flexed his muscle. He refused to release the director and behind the scenes made sure no other studio would hire Capra as long as he was under Columbia contract. Faced with a de facto blackballing in Hollywood, Capra backed down and fulfilled his Columbia deal with 2 more films. Once free, however, Capra never worked for Harry Cohn again. Their rift became legend, and it showed Cohn's zero-sum approach to power. The Capra affair sent a chilling message to others on the lot. No one, not even a genius director with Oscars on the shelf, was bigger than Harry Cohn. Capra wasn't the only filmmaker bruised by Cohn's methods. Veteran director King Vidor similarly bristled under Cohn's autocracy and sought release from his contract in the late 1930s. When Cohn resisted, Vidor took him to court, airing Columbia's dirty laundry in public. In court filings, Vidor threatened to expose Cohn's abusive language and workplace hostility toward employees. The dispute made headlines and it painted Cohn as a tyrant. The affair was a major embarrassment for the studio. Ultimately, MGM's Louis B. Mayer, an elder statesman among studio chiefs, intervened to broker a settlement and hush up the feud. But the damage to Cohn's reputation was done. By 1940, the industry widely knew what writer Herman Mankiewicz meant when he joked that it took more than one man to change my friend Godfrey into my friend Cohn. The beloved Universal picture would have, he implied, been a grotesque egomania project if it had been made by Columbia. The studio boss had become an object of morbid fascination, despised by many, respected by a few, and feared by all. As Associated Press reporter James Bacon recalled of arriving in 1940s Hollywood, I went from covering Al Capone to covering Harry Cohn. Cohn was by far the meanest. The comparison to Capone was no idle jibe. It spoke to the real culture of mob-like intimidation Cohn fostered on the Columbia lot. Even as he waged war with his directors, Harry Cohn was entangled in a more personal battle on the home front. His first marriage to a New York stage actress named Rose Barker was collapsing. Cohn had wed Barker back in 1923 during Columbia's lean years, but by the late 1930s the relationship had soured, not least due to Harry's infidelities. The studio boss now had his eye on a younger conquest. In 1935, Columbia signed a fresh-faced starlet named Joan Perry, a model turned actress 2 decades Harry's junior. She was signed the very same week as another newcomer, a 17-year-old dancer named Rita Hayworth, and Cohn reportedly made his intentions plain from the outset. "Hayworth will be a star, and you'll be my wife," he told Perry matter-of-factly. It was less a proposal than a prediction from a man used to getting his way. Joan Perry laughed it off at the time, but sure enough, in 1941, immediately after Cohn's long-delayed divorce from Rose was finalized, Harry Cohn married the young actress. True to his word, he had made Hayworth a star and Perry his trophy wife in the same stroke. At Columbia's swank wedding party for the boss, guests marveled at Cohn's audacity. Few realized that Cohn's marriage would actually prove one of the more tender facets of his life. Joan Perry later said she saw a softer side of Harry away from the studio, a hint that the tyrant could play doing husband at home. Still, the optics were unsettling. A powerful producer plucking a pretty contract player to wed, as casually as casting a movie. It underscored an open secret in Hollywood, one that Harry Cohn embodied more brazenly than perhaps any mogul of his era. Namely that the casting couch culture of sexual favors and studio pressure was rampant, and at Columbia, Cohn himself sat at the center of that sordid web. He had always been a womanizer, but as studio chief, his predatory behavior became systemic and abusive. Cohn wasn't the first Hollywood mogul to demand sex in exchange for career advancement, and he certainly wasn't the last, as the recent Harvey Weinstein scandal proved. But contemporaries agreed he was the worst. Film historian Neil Gabler bluntly labeled Harry Cohn, quote, "the most notorious and insatiable sexual predator among studio bosses of the golden age." Actresses under Columbia contract quickly learned that resisting the boss's advances could be hazardous to one's career. Cohn would summon starlets for afternoon trysts in a private room adjoining his executive suite, or invite them for cruises on his yacht, invitations that felt more like commands. Those who obliged might land a decent role. Those who refused were often fired on the spot and blackballed from the industry. It was a cruel calculus, and many young women felt they had little choice. The studio's bigger female stars enjoyed slightly more leverage. If a leading lady was bringing in big box office revenue, Cohn could tolerate her rebuffs, up to a point. Rita Hayworth was one such moneymaker who repeatedly deflected Cohn's advances, but even she was not immune to retaliation. Once, after refusing to obey some personal demand, Hayworth was fined by Cohn for insubordination and docked pay as a warning. What exactly the infraction was isn't clear, but colleagues believed it stemmed from Hayworth asserting control over her choices of roles, a temerity Cohn could not stand. Likewise, iconoclastic stars like Katharine Hepburn and Joan Crawford, who made Columbia lucrative on loan-out deals, managed to spurn Cohn's lewd propositions without dire consequence. But these were exceptions. Columbia's roster was filled with vulnerable young actresses, many of them anxious for their big break, whom Cohn saw as a private harem. To facilitate his liaisons, he even went so far as to bug the Columbia lot with listening devices. Cohn had hidden microphones in actresses' dressing rooms and on sound stages, monitoring conversations to ferret out who gossiped about him or who might be meeting with rival studio scouts, and who knows what else he tuned into. This Orwellian surveillance amplified the climate of fear. He'd keep tabs on all of the writers, remembered James Bacon, and he used to fire people all the time, usually on Christmas Eve. Firing someone as a Hollywood surprise was vintage Harry Cohn cruelty. For the women he targeted, his cruelty was far more personal. By the mid-1940s, Cohn's reputation as a tyrant and predator was well established, so much so that one celebrated Columbia actress nearly took violent retribution. Jean Arthur, the sparkling star of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, had endured Cohn's harassment for years. It's a story I covered in part in my video on Jean, which you can check out after this one. I'll link it on screen now and in the description, but I'll give a brief rundown of the dangerous events here too. In 1945, Arthur abruptly quit the film business, and the story she later confided to a writer partly explains why. She had just lost a legal battle against Cohn, which she felt was extremely unjust. But there was more to the story than her frustrations at being contractually abused. Columbia's female dressing rooms, Arthur revealed, were arranged along a dimly lit hallway, and Cohn had a secret door that allowed him to slip in unannounced. There was a secret entrance, and studio chief Harry Cohn would come in there and attack the actresses, Arthur told screenwriter Richard McBride. Fed up and fearful, Arthur resolved to do the unthinkable. She decided she would kill Harry Cohn. According to McBride, Arthur carried a loaded pistol on the lot and thought she could shoot him in the hallway and get away with it. On the appointed day, however, as she skulked around the backlot searching for the right moment, she had a change of heart. Arthur walked the studio grounds for 3 hours battling rage and conscience, and ultimately chose a different escape. She walked off the Columbia lot forever, leaving her contract and a glittering career behind rather than endure Cohn's abuse any longer. The fact that one of Hollywood's top comedians even contemplated homicide to free herself from a studio boss speaks volumes about Harry Cohn's reign of terror. As Hollywood reckoned with sexual misconduct scandals in recent years, some have pointed to Harry Cohn as an early exemplar of the casting couch predator, a studio-era Harvey Weinstein in all but name. Cohn's offenses were spoken of in industry gossip and the occasional whisper to a reporter, but in that era few dared challenge a movie mogul openly. He carried on largely unchecked, protected by wealth, power, and complicit silence. Through it all, Cohn saw himself not as a villain, but as a pragmatic businessman. He prided himself on knowing what and who would sell. In one famous instance, he ordered a young contract player named Margarita Cancino to transform her appearance. He raised her hairline through painful electrolysis to alter her look, dyed her raven hair red, and gave her a new sultry stage name, which was, of course, Rita Hayworth. The makeover was indeed the making of a star, and Hayworth became the love goddess of 1940 cinema. Cohn took full credit, crowing that he had created a fantasy figure that men would pay to watch. He was not wrong, yet behind Hayworth's dazzling smile lay a woman Cohn treated as personal property. When Hayworth eloped with director Orson Welles in 1943 against Cohn's wishes, the mogul erupted in fury. He feared the marriage would disrupt Hayworth's image and box office appeal, and though he couldn't fire a star of her stature, he made her life extremely difficult. Cohn's micromanagement extended even to the film roles his actresses played and the men they dated, and this was all a presaging of the most explosive conflict of his career, still to come in the 1950s. Meanwhile, Columbia Pictures rolled on, achieving great critical and commercial heights even as its president's private vices festered in the shadows. In the 1940s, the studio prospered from diverse hits. Gilda made Rita Hayworth an icon. Director George Stevens' Penny Serenade and Charles Vidor's Covergirl kept audiences smiling. And a hard-hitting drama, All the King's Men, earned Columbia another Best Picture Oscar. Cohn's intuition for popular taste rarely failed him. He famously described his method for judging movies as the Fanny test. "I have a foolproof device for judging whether a picture is good or bad," Cohn said. "If my fanny squirms, it's bad. If my fanny doesn't squirm, it's good." Crude as it sounded, the formula worked. He had an uncanny instinct for what everyday Americans wanted to see. Under Cohn's command, Columbia in the 1950s would reach new pinnacles, producing a string of prestige films that reaped Oscars and acclaim. But those successes would arrive even as Hollywood, and Harry Cohn himself, entered a period of turmoil. The old studio system was cracking, external scandals were encroaching, and Cohn's dictatorial ways were about to face their fiercest tests. By the early 1950s, Harry Cohn had reigned over Columbia Pictures for more than 3 decades. He was at the summit of Hollywood, and he knew it. The post-war years saw Columbia release some of its greatest films. In 1953, From Here to Eternity, the frank tale of army life and love on the eve of Pearl Harbor, won the Academy Award for Best Picture and cemented Columbia's status as a top-tier studio. The next year brought On the Waterfront, a gritty drama about corruption on the New York docks that snagged 8 Oscars, including Best Picture. Cohn took particular pride in On the Waterfront. Not only had Columbia backed the film when other studios were skittish, its story had whiffs of social criticism and allusions to the McCarthy era and former dilemma, but it also vindicated one of Cohn's own. The film's screenwriter Bud Schulberg was a friendly witness before Congress who named communists in Hollywood. Cohn, an ardent anti-communist, delighted in the film's success and its message of a courageous informer standing up to mobsters. Indeed, Harry Cohn had enthusiastically cooperated with the anti-communist blacklist fervor in Hollywood, ousting any talent suspected of leftist sympathies. One of Columbia's brightest writers, Sidney Buckman, who wrote Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, was ensnared by the HUAC investigations. Cohn initially tried to shield Buckman, keeping him on despite his refusal to name names, but Columbia's board of directors compelled Cohn to terminate the writer's contract in 1951. Even as a staunch patriot, Cohn chafed at anyone telling him which employees he could keep. The episode illustrated that not even Harry Cohn was entirely unchecked. On rare occasions, the corporate structure reined him in, but he resented it. Buckman was blacklisted and fled to Europe. Cohn moved on to more politically compliant screenwriters. Columbia's hot streak continued mid-decade. The studio put its weight behind David Lean's epic The Bridge on the River Kwai, another Best Picture winner distributed by Columbia, and Cohn welcomed a new generation of stars. He had taken a shine to a witty young actor named Jack Lemmon, making him a leading man in Mr. Roberts and Some Like It Hot. He also signed a brooding method actor, Marlon Brando, to a multi-picture deal after Waterfront showcased Brando's raw charisma and won him a Best Actor Oscar. For a time, it seemed Cohn could do no wrong at the box office, yet one of his proudest protégés would precipitate the crisis that ultimately unraveled him. The protégé was a willowy blonde from Chicago with an ethereal beauty, a young woman Cohn was determined to mold into Hollywood's next great siren. Her name was Kim Novak. Kim Novak arrived in Hollywood in 1953 and was promptly signed by Columbia at Cohn's behest. The mogul sensed star quality in the shy 20-year-old model, even if she needed refinement. In classic Cohn fashion, he set about manufacturing a marketable image for her. He ordered Novak to lose weight, bleached her hair platinum blonde, and tried to change her name to the more Anglo-sounding Kit Marlowe. Novak balked at that last indignity. Cohn's grooming paid off when Novak proved a smash in 1955's Picnic and The Man with the Golden Arm. By 1957, she was Columbia's top box office draw, a potential successor to Rita Hayworth's mantle as the studio's reigning glamour queen. But Novak, poised and independent-minded, bristled at Cohn's controlling ways. He bullied her, calling her a dumb Polak in meetings. Novak of Czech heritage wryly noted she wasn't even Polish. Cohn just knew the slur would sting. She endured the abuse quietly and delivered on screen. In Hollywood, they think they want you, but really they want what they want you to be. Novak would later reflect on moguls like Cohn. Harry Cohn certainly had a fixed idea of what he wanted Kim Novak to be, and it did not involve her having a private life beyond his control. Thus, when gossip emerged in 1957 that Novak was clandestinely dating someone utterly off-limits in Cohn's eyes, the mogul's reaction was volcanic. The man in question was Sammy Davis Jr., the multi-talented black entertainer who was one of the hottest nightclub stars in America. Davis was Hollywood's favorite tap-dancing, wisecracking, good-time guy, but in segregated 1957, an interracial romance was considered career suicide. More to the point, it was personally intolerable to Harry Cohn. To Cohn, Novak was an investment he had painstakingly crafted. The idea that she might risk her image by seeing a black man enraged him. When a British tabloid reported that Novak and Davis might even be secretly engaged, Cohn nearly lost his mind. He thought of Novak as property he'd invested in, and now that property was defying him. In truth, some historians suggest Cohn's own bigotry was as much a factor as business. He simply couldn't abide the idea of a white movie goddess with a black man. Either way, he resolved to end the Novak-Davis liaison by any means necessary. What followed became one of Hollywood's most notorious behind-the-scenes dramas. On the morning of September 26, 1957, while flying back to Los Angeles from New York, Harry Cohn suffered a massive heart attack. The timing was no coincidence. Cohn's coronary struck mere hours after he got wind of Novak's supposed engagement to Sammy Davis. The stress of losing control over his star literally struck him in the heart. He survived that attack, but it was one of the first of several in the months to come, as the Novak affair escalated. Convalescing, Cohn stewed and plotted. He was determined that if charm and reason wouldn't separate the lovers, fear would. Calling in favors from his underworld contacts, Cohn arranged for a message to be sent to Sammy Davis Jr. that could not be ignored. According to numerous accounts, Cohn effectively put out a mob hit threat on the Rat Pack entertainer. Gangster Mickey Cohen, Los Angeles' most infamous mob figure, delivered the ultimatum to Davis's father in person. The threat was bone-chilling. If Sammy Davis didn't stop seeing Kim Novak immediately, the mob would, quote, break both of his legs and put out his other eye and bury him in a hole. Davis had lost one eye in a car accident a few years prior. The thugs literally threatened to blind him fully. Arthur Silber, a friend present when Davis received the warning call, recalled the singer was scared as hell, and with good reason. In later years, Novak herself said she had no doubt Cohn would have got his gangster friends to follow through on hurting Sammy. Cohn was definitely in with the mob, Novak remarked. He threatened to take out Sammy's other eye. Facing mutilation or worse, Sammy Davis Jr. capitulated. In a desperate gambit to placate Cohn and the mob, Davis agreed to enter into a sham marriage with a black showgirl, thereby publicly ending his interracial romance. In early January 1958, just weeks after the threats, Davis hastily married Lorraine White, a Las Vegas dancer, in a quickie ceremony attended by a few friends. Davis paid his new bride a lump sum to go along with the charade. The wedding was joyless. Silber recalled Davis got blind drunk that night and even tried to strangle the poor young woman in a fit of drunken rage and anguish. He was so hurt. Why won't they let me live my life? He kept saying, Silber recounted. The sham marriage lasted only a few months, but it served its purpose. Kim Novak was safely steered away from Sammy Davis, and Harry Cohn could breathe easy again, at least on that front. The Novak-Davis affair had shown the true depths of Harry Cohn's ruthlessness, orchestrating a mafia-backed threat to preserve a starlet's purity and his studio's investment. It was the kind of behind-closed-doors horror that would not fully come to light until many years later. But even as Cohn gloated over bending fate to his will, the strain was taking a mortal toll. The mogul had staved off scandal, but at the cost of his own failing heart. A final act was about to play out, one that no amount of power could prevent. In the winter of 1958, Harry Cohn's empire was at its zenith, and its master was in decline. The 66-year-old studio chief had never been a paragon of health. He was overweight, fond of rich food and drink, and perpetually ran himself ragged with work, anger, and stress. After his initial heart attack in late 1957, Cohn was warned by doctors to slow down. Predictably, he ignored them. Columbia was preparing a slate of ambitious films for 1958 to 1959, including Anatomy of a Murder, which Cohn had just greenlit, and Cohn insisted on supervising every detail as usual. But colleagues noticed a fraying at the edges. The Novak incident had shaken him more deeply than he let on. He may have modeled himself on Mussolini and the mob, trying to present a man seemingly unbreakable, but in private, the stress showed. He took to wearing a gaudy ruby pinky ring, a matching friendship ring identical to one worn by his mob acquaintance Johnny Rosselli, perhaps as a totem of security or even to ward off the incoming karmic storm. In February 1958, Cohn decided to take a rare break. He flew to Arizona for a short vacation at the Arizona Biltmore Hotel, a luxury resort. On the evening of February 27th, after finishing a cordial dinner with old friends, Harry Cohn suffered a massive second heart attack. He collapsed at the Biltmore and was rushed toward St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix, but he never made it. Harry Cohn was pronounced dead in the ambulance en route, his iron grip on Columbia finally slackening in the most final way imaginable. News of Cohn's death sent a jolt through Hollywood. However despised he may have been, Cohn had been a pillar of the old studio system, one of the last all-powerful moguls. Now he was gone, and an uneasy mix of grief and grim satisfaction washed over the film colony. At Columbia's Gower Street studio, Cohn's staff wept genuinely. Many had known no other working life than serving Mr. Cohn, yet across town others privately popped champagne. Rival producer Daryl Zanuck reportedly remarked that Cohn's death was good for Hollywood. Dozens of actresses and screenwriters whom Cohn had wronged over the years certainly weren't mourning. Nonetheless, out of respect or curiosity, nearly everyone in the industry showed up for Harry Cohn's funeral. On March 2, 1958, some 2,000 people packed Columbia Soundstage 15, converted for the occasion. It was one of the largest funerals Hollywood had ever seen. The service featured eulogies that strained to find kind words. Noted playwright Clifford Odets delivered a surprisingly eloquent tribute, praising Cohn's vitality and contributions to the art of film. Odets, who had worked at Columbia, likely had his own conflicted feelings but rose to the task. Actor Danny Kaye also spoke, choosing humor and gentle recollection rather than addressing the elephant in the room, the fact that the deceased had been widely hated by almost everyone present. When Red Skelton made his now famous wisecrack about the throngs of attendees, even the solemn clergy had to chuckle. It was left to Skelton, the clown prince of 1950s comedy, to voice what everyone knew. Harry Cohn was so reviled that people would line up in relief at his death. Yet it's never so simple as good riddance. Harry Cohn's legacy defies easy summary. He was, beyond doubt, an awful man to many who knew him, Hollywood's meanest man, as more than one columnist dubbed him. He violated the dignity of countless women, browbeat writers and directors, and held on to power through fear and favor. He even tried to script the private lives of his stars as if they were studio productions. In that, he embodied the very worst of Hollywood's old power structure. And still, he got movies made, classic movies, great movies. Columbia Pictures under Cohn's reign earned 45 Academy Awards for films he produced, and many more nominations. He had a hand in launching iconic careers, from Rita Hayworth to Jack Lemmon. Frank Capra, despite his falling out with Cohn, once admitted that Harry had an uncanny nose for a good story and a hit picture. Cohn could be generous when it suited him. He paid medical bills for employees in need, donated to charity, if with self-serving fanfare, and in his softest moments played doting father to his 3 children. Joan Perry Cohn, his widow, would later defend Harry as a misunderstood man, saying he had to be gruff to get things done in a cutthroat industry. Perhaps there's a grain of truth in that. The studio system was not built by gentle souls. It took force of will, even force of personality, to bring a studio like Columbia into existence. Cohn supplied that in abundance. For better and worse, Harry Cohn was Columbia Pictures. "I die without Columbia," he once said, and in a way, he did. And the reverse was also true. After his death, the studio lost its mooring. Within a few years, the family-owned Columbia was taken over by outside corporate management, and the era of the moguls faded into history. But the films Harry Cohn championed live on, as does the lore surrounding his larger-than-life persona. Today, when film buffs watch Clark Gable in It Happened One Night or Kim Novak in Vertigo, they are enjoying the enduring artistry that emerged in spite of, and sometimes because of, Cohn's tyrannical leadership. His life is a study in contradictions, a street-hardened Jew who idolized fascism, a crude bully who could be visionary about cinema, a man who accumulated enemies as readily as Oscars. Harry Cohn had spent a lifetime bending Hollywood to his will. For one final day, even in death, he drew a capacity crowd. It was the last opening night for Columbia's irascible king, closing the curtain on a Hollywood saga of ambition, excess, and the heavy price of getting what you want. Well, that's about all for this one. Quite a figure. Why don't you let me know what you think of Harry Cohn's legacy in the comments? As movie fans, are we better or worse off for having him in charge at Columbia? If you want a little of that old studio-era glamour for yourself, don't forget to take a look at the Hollywood Mystery Store, where I have a range of exclusively designed shirts featuring figures like William Powell and Kay Francis. I'll link it on screen now and down in the description. Shirts start from $25 and come in a variety of sizes and colors. And every sale is a huge help to the channel, so thank you. Until next week, sweet dreams.